If I sold this in the town that I grew up in Alabama, I would be thrown in jail.
Greetings, Earthlings, and welcome back to Earthlings 2.0, the show where we imagine how we can be better versions of ourselves and build a collective future we actually want to live in. Today's guest is on a mission to provide us Earthlings with delicious meat options without the need to slaughter animals. Yes, we are talking about cultured meat grown in a lab, chicken specifically. We'll explore how they do it, where that meat is currently available, and what the future looks like for the company and the meat industry as a whole with this innovation. But before we get there, I'm your host, Lisa Ann Pinkerton. I'm the CEO of the award winning PR firm Technica Communications, which is celebrating 15 years of business, by the way. I'm also the founder of Women in Clean Tech and Sustainability. And before all of that, I was a former award winning environmental science reporter for NPR and PBS. And I want to take a moment to thank you for joining us today. Thank you for being a listener. If this is your first episode, welcome. I hope you enjoy this content and feel free to have a look around at some of the other things that we have put up in our feed. Also, if this is your 50th episode, thank you so much for spending time with us each week. And on that note of appreciation, we'd love to get to know you better. So take a moment right now, go to our show notes, and click on the listener survey. We also have a Substack newsletter, and you can scroll the links in the show note for that as well. And if you take this survey or you join our newsletter, this is going to help us understand who you are as listeners so we can better cater to your listening preferences. Finally, a last request before we dive into this new world of sustainable agriculture. Please consider recommending Earthlings 2.0 to a friend. If you can do this for us, it is a lovely gift that you can give back to the podcast and all the wonderful people who are on the production staff, like Jay and Jenna and Stacia and Olivia. It's not just me here, folks. So please take a moment to share the Earthlings 2.0 podcast with people who you think would appreciate it. And last but not least, thank you to Resource Labs for having us on the network. Now, I'm sure you've noticed over the years that the availability of eggs laid by chickens living in cages or free to roam around the pasture has increased over the decades in various countries, especially here in the United States. And even companies like Nestle and McDonald's have pledged to go cage free for egg laying hens. Unfortunately, the plight of the meat chickens remains pretty dire. We as Earthlings currently raise and slaughter 74 billion chickens a year. And given that there's 8.1 billion people on the planet, that's over 9 chickens per Earthling. And it's going to go up to 15% by 2032 to about 85 billion chickens annually. And the majority of these chickens are not running around in a pasture doing happy chicken things. They are raised in huge crowded sheds or cramped cages. They're also bred to grow muscle really fast, and the rest of their bodies just can't keep up. So they struggle with a lot of health problems and, frankly, mobility issues. Lameness is a very big problem for chickens living in these conditions. Even if they could roam around, there's so many of them, they can't. So they just end up sitting in their own excrement for 42 days as they grow, and then they're slaughtered. In fact, 42 days still means that these chickens, even though they look like adults, are actually still babies. And a lot of us don't eat veal because baby cows not being able to move is an undesirable experience. And it's interesting that we don't translate that same attribute to chickens when the same thing is happening. In fact, I found this really interesting graphic from Vox, and we're going to put it on the social media channels this week. And it reveals the size change over the past 70 years from the 1950s. It's pretty interesting. So I'm sure you're thinking, there has to be a better way. Well, animal welfare groups have successfully campaigned to get some major food corporations to pledge to treat their chickens better. But Bloomberg also reports that those companies have either withdrawn their pledges or failed to report on progress. So, our guest today would say cultivated meat is the better way. His name is Joshua Tetrick, and he's the co founder and CEO of Eat Just, a San Francisco based company that makes plant based alternatives for conventionally produced egg products, as well as now cultivated chicken branded as good meat. The company was named a unicorn startup in 2016. We caught up with him at the headquarters of Eat Just in Alameda, California. Right around the same time, some really big news was hitting for the company, and we're going to cover that in the interview. So you might hear a growing, bustling office environment in the background while we're having our conversation. And we started talking about what good meat means to him.
I don't think human beings are hardwired to abuse animals. I don't think we're hardwired to have this primal want to slaughter 90 billion animals and confine them in tiny little spaces so small they can barely breathe or turn around. I think we're hardwired to want to hold them and laugh at them and be in awe of them. And our food system today is the antithesis of that. And good meat is about making meat that enables us to enjoy this thing that we become addicted to, but in a way that is, I think, much more in tune with those instincts of kindness that we have towards other creatures.
I know what you mean because when maybe what was it, maybe 20 years ago when the book Fast Food Nation came out, The Dark Side of the All American Meal, that book I found fascinating, and I was not prepared for how it would change the types of meat that I ate. And I would tell people who wanted to read it, I was like, okay, you can go ahead and read that, but just be prepared that you're going to change your diet after this. The way our industrial food system operates, it's sort of like it hides a lot of things from us because if we actually knew what was going on, we would lose our appetite, quite frankly.
Yeah, we not only would lose our appetite, we would live in a constant state of this cognitive dissonance where we think about ourselves as one thing, but our actions reveal quite another thing. And I don't think that the vast majority of humans out there crave to participate in abuse for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. There's a hesitation even for me to like use that word abuse in a way, because I know when I use the word abuse, people are going to feel deeply judged by it and potentially traumatized by it. But that is what it is. But it's also real abuse to the ecosystems of our planet, to forests, when we direct bulldozers to knock down trees to plant soy and corn, to our ocean ecosystems. And good meat for us is really about attempting to make something that is much less harmful, much easier for people to eat. And it's this idea of cultivating meat instead of slaughtering meat, of which we're the first company in the world to sell.
Yes, let's talk about that. You are cultivating meat and you're starting with chicken through what's termed cellular agriculture. So can you explain the process of how you culture meat?
Yeah, so if you think about conventional meat today or slaughtered meat, 90 billion animals every single year are waiting to be slaughtered. And they're grown in a very artificial way, not looking anything like they did 30, 100 years ago. These animals are not grown near a red barn with a 7-year-old girl with a butterfly net with, banjo music playing in the background. That's a fantasy depiction that we've created in our mind to make us feel a little bit better about where our meat comes from. The reality is that the vast majority of meat come from dark warehouses that smell of urine, that are loud and screeching and very disorienting for humans that step foot inside them, if they dare, and for the animals that live in them. Cultivating meat doesn't have any of that. Doesn't have the red barn either.
Looks more like a lab, I'm assuming.
So it's a manufacturing facility. It has stainless steel vessels called bioreactors. We start with a cell. We feed the cell nutrients like amino acids and sugars and salts. The cell over the course of about 3 weeks is doubling. And then in this stainless steel vessel, it kind of looks like a brewery that you would find that would make your beer. We remove it from that stainless steel vessel, and then we can shape it into what the finished product looks like, whether that is retail or food service or some other channel. And yeah, we became the first company in the world to launch cultivated meat when we launched our chicken in Singapore in late 2020. And this week, we become the first company in the world ever to sell cultivated meat at retail. So it's the first time in history that consumers can actually bring real slaughter-free meat home, put it in a pan, cook it up with their families. And that's a pretty significant change from the world that we've been living in before. It's still at a very, very frustratingly small scale. But slaughtering animals once started at a small scale too. So things can change.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on that achievement. What is the product that you are now selling at retail in Singapore?
It's a simple piece of chicken. So it's just pieces of chicken torn up, and we put it in a bag, put our label on it, and we sell it.
And I was looking at the press release, and it says it seems like there's a combination of the cultured meat and then also plant protein that's involved. So can you kind of break down for us what are the sort of the components that make up this product?
Yes, so ever since we first launched cultivated meat, we've always had plant-based ingredients in it. So this continues that. So we have some plant proteins in it, a binder in it, some salt in it, and our cultivated chicken.
And does it look like chicken? Does it have those the same kind of texture and taste, I assume?
Imagine you were holding a piece of chicken in front of you and you're tearing it off in a bowl, and then look at the bowl and those pieces look like what we're selling.
How did you develop this process?
Culturing animal cells has been around for many decades. So what we did is take the idea of culturing animal cells and say, can we evolve it into the idea that you're culturing animal cells not for vaccine production, but for meat production. And there are a number of companies in the space and a number of scientists over the decades that have helped to lay the groundwork for the basic science. So we've built on that and developed our unique approach to converting that cell into a tasty piece of chicken. And we've been doing the manufacturing in Singapore and in the United States, so again, at a very small scale. And it requires a lot of engineering, a lot of cell line development, a lot of food science, a lot of chefery, and a lot of time.
Chefery, that's a new term.
Yes, smart chefs to make sure at the end of the day it actually tastes really good too.
Do you have to? I mean, I assume it's because it tastes the same. It has the same texture. I assume it cooks the same. Do you have any guidelines that you're recommending to the people in Singapore who might buy this product now?
We have no guidelines other than treat it like you would treat chicken. Simple instructions.
And how do you get these cells to culture? Do you have to, keep finding animals to use it, to use these cells, or are you able to grow your own cells to then reuse indefinitely? How does that work?
Yeah, we can so from a single cell, we can make billions of pounds of meat. So we don't need to keep dipping back into it. So just with one cell, we can continue that on.
Do you use any other methods in your production? I assume you have to, maybe there's molds that allow you to create the final shape of the product. Anything else that you use in terms of techniques to manufacture this meat?
So when we remove the meat from this vessel, again, just think in your mind's eye like a brewery type deal. So we then put the meat through a machine called an extruder. So the extruder is helping to add texture. Think of a machine that is applying pressure and heat to the meat, and that is creating these unique textures that we have, so that when you eat it, you're like, oh, okay, this is just like a piece of shredded chicken.
Yeah. And it's fascinating how the brain will associate concepts to what it's eating. As an example, I remember once I was at South by Southwest, and there were people who were talking about cricket meal as sort of like, this is going to be a future protein, and they had some snack bars. And I was like, oh, I've never had cricket meal before, so I'll try it out. And this is a powder, right? In the bar. But there were also peanuts in the bar. So when I ate it, my brain was like, oh, that's the cricket. That's it. That crunch right there, that's the cricket. And I was like, no, 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 that's not, it's a peanut. And I can see how the inverse could be true for the work that you're doing. If people don't know that what they're eating is a cultured chicken, they might not, their brain is just going to assume it's normal chicken.
If I didn't tell a consumer that it's cultivated chicken, they would just assume it's chicken, for sure.
And this is what fascinates me, because we're moving into this new future where we're not as dependent on animal husbandry, all that land, all the emissions and runoff that comes from raising livestock, and we can still have the same end product that we have come to enjoy.
Languages, I never realized just like how powerful language is until like I dove deeper into this world. But even, and I know you're not meaning it all this way, like even the language we use to describe it masks what it actually is. Like, so for example, these common phrases that you just used there, you said animal husbandry. Like my brain, when I think of animal husbandry, thinks of that is like animal caretaking or animal, or the word raising. Like the word raising has a positive connotation. Like I don't have kids one day. I raise my little boy. I raise my little girl. My brother is raising my niece, June. There's this beautiful thing about it. Except in the context of what we're talking about here, there's a giant effing warehouse with about 100,000 chickens going to the bathroom on each other in a dark, dimly lit place, and they're slaughtered after 45 days. So to like label it, as the industry does, as animal husbandry or as raising is absolutely insane. There is no connection to reality. But these words that are used create a perception in people's head about what something actually is, when in fact it's just the opposite of that. I know you didn't mean it. At least in saying that, but it's just, it's language is, people get lost with it.
Yeah, it's a trick of perception. Like we do it just with how we label meat, right? Beef is like, you don't say I'll have some cow, please. You say I'll have some beef. You don't say I'll have some pig.
Exactly.
I'll have pork. I'll have some deer. I'll have venison, right? Elk's a little different. Elk is elk, bison is bison. When you start to get into the gamey meats, it is, you call it what it is.
Yeah. I mean, you said it, that the more abstract you can make something, the more that it is hiding what the thing actually is. The more layers you put in front of it, the more you remove from, that is a bird that has a family that likes to engage in natural behaviors just like you do or your dog does, like going out in the sun. And the more you then say, okay, now let me remove the feathers, let me dunk it, now let me look at it so you don't even see the head anymore, you just see the meat. Okay, now let's add another, so now let's chop it up into small pieces. Okay, now let's add another section. Now let's put some, breading on top of it. Now let's make another piece. Let's turn it into a dino nugget. Now let's add another piece. Let's put some seasoning on it. Let's put another abstraction on it. Let's put it in a box with, a cartoon character, right? By the time you do that, the idea of what you're actually eating is gone, right? The mama bird with hens walking around trying to enjoy the sun has been obliterated. And every layer of abstraction separates you from what is. It separates you from what the truth is. It separates you from kindness. And unfortunately, that's a big reason why factory farming has taken over the planet. For all those people that, are in a deep search for the truth, right? You want to go down a rabbit hole finding the truth, go down this rabbit hole.
And be prepared to change your diet once you have. And a lot of people do. Veganism, of course, is continuing to gain momentum as a movement. And I actually had a question for you. Are there people who are vegan who would say, yeah, I'll eat cultivated meat because it doesn't include the slaughtering of animals? Or are there still people who will say, no, that's still meat product, so I'm not going to touch it? What's been the reaction that you've heard from folks?
We have plenty of people who have never had meat in their lives who try this, and they're down with it. We have people that I've met who are vegans who are like, I'm supportive of it, right? But I don't want to touch it. I want to watch people eat it, but I don't want to partake in it.
Yeah, it's because it's still, there's still philosophy behind, why certain people become vegan and they want to stick to that.
Yeah. And for us, we're not, I'm vegan. I eat our meat, but other than that, I'm vegan. I'm not doing this for folks who are vegan. If folks who are vegan, were the only people out there, I would be doing something else with my life. I wouldn't be putting myself through this nonsense. This hard work. I'd definitely be doing something else with my life.
Who are some of you said there's a lot of chefery going on? Who are some of the chefs that you've been working with, and what's been their response to the product? What have they done with it?
Like, they're really the guardians of taste. So my way of ensuring that the thing actually tastes good is to make sure they're trying it. I don't want to ever be diluted. So we have Michelin star chefs who ensure whether it's certain seasoning, certain textures, that they're all dialed in properly. So they're part of our research and development team.
What advice did they give you early on that helped you dial this in?
The chefs, it's really just being very dogmatic about taste. Like, are people going to eat this because of morality? Yes. Are people going to eat this because they don't want to harm the planet? Yes. Are people going to eat this because they care about that mother hen? Yes. However, they need to eat it because it just tastes really good. So we focus on taste as if people are not drawn to it for those other reasons. If all they cared about was, does this taste really good? We need to make sure it tastes really good. So that's just the point of view that we have. And it's a very uncompromising point of view that can cause a lot of frustration sometimes, because sometimes it means we won't want something until it reaches that threshold. But that's just what you got to do.
Yeah. In the past couple of decades, we've seen from the egg industry, we've gone from like only can buy standard eggs to cage-free and to pasture-raised, right? We've also seen some of that with meat over the years. What is your prediction on how this cultured meat is going to roll out in the future? What can we expect in terms of its availability and use?
It'll be. Just like slaughtering meat was once small scale, this will be small scale for a while. Small scale, like right now, our retail launch is just in a single location, so historic but still very small. So I think by the end of the decade, the industry will be producing hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of pounds of meat. But this is a multi-decade long project until it's available to most people around the world, right? This is long term, but we think the alternative is to not pursue it, but it's long term. So I think many decades until it's available to everyone.
And how do you think it might change the meat availability in certain regions where people don't eat as much meat because it's just simply they don't have the facilities to raise enough livestock, or economics just don't work? Do you anticipate a future where you're able to provide an increased amount of protein availability in certain regions where it hasn't been otherwise?
Longer term, longer term, we see a world in which this kind of meat, cultivating meat, is significantly less costly than slaughter meat, many decades out, but I think that's where it's headed. We think slaughter-free meat will be looked at as, a relic of the past.
It was a solution for a previous problem set. Now we have a new problem set. And something we haven't mentioned yet is that you're not using antibiotics, you're not using hormones in those products. I think that goes without saying, but I'm just going to say it anyway. My next question is, what has been the regulatory approval process for you to be able to sell your meat in Singapore? And what are you looking at for different countries around the world?
Yeah, so we're approved to sell both in the United States and Singapore. So both the FDA and the USDA have approved us to sell in the US, and the regulators in Singapore. So we had to show that it's safe. That's the primary thing, right? The regulators are not judging whether this is good for the industry or bad for the industry, or whether this is good for me or bad for me, or whether the World Economic Forum supports it or is against it, or whether Ron DeSantis likes it or doesn't. They don't give a damn about any of that stuff. They're just focused on, is this safe? So that's what we provide to them. It's information related to the stability of the cell line. Is there E. coli in this? No. Is there salmonella in this? No. How do we process it? How do we ensure sterility through the process? And after a pretty extensive review by these 3 different agencies, all have determined that it is safe for human consumption, and we're good to sell. Now, in the midst of this, we've actually had 2 states in the United States, Florida and my home state of Alabama, who have decided to enact bans that actually criminalize the sale of cultivated meat. So if I sold this in the town that I grew up in Alabama, I would be thrown in jail. And the reason for these laws being passed, if you can believe this, but this is the actual reason stated. This is just taken right from the press release. The reason stated is that the globalists at the World Economic Forum in Switzerland are conspiring together to force this meat and insects on a global population to enforce their authoritarian compulsions. That is literally in the press release.
No, there's no fear mongering there.
Yeah. And it's just completely ridiculous. Like, no one even believes it. It's just completely insane. But I mean, that just shows that's actually what we're talking about here.
Well, that tells you actually how threatened the industry must feel, even at this very early stage, to take that kind of protectionist stance before this meat is even remotely rolled out in a mainstream way.
Well, they both simultaneously say there's no way it'll scale and consumers don't like it, and spend millions of dollars enacting bans.
Which, as entrenched interests, that's, kind of the card they all play, right? We've seen this in the utility industry. You see it in healthcare, pharmaceuticals, etc. Like, this is what, big business does. This is the card they have to play. They can delay and use the power of policy to make it harder for under-resourced upstarts to gain a foothold, because they're threatened, because they see it.
That's exactly the deal. We're just going to keep going. So we know that's going to happen, but we're going to keep rolling.
Well, I once had a mentor tell me, if you're not making somebody angry, you're not doing something right.
I believe it. I believe it.
Earthlings, meat grown without slaughter. Would you eat it? If not, why not? If you feel queasy about eating something grown in the lab, you might want to ask yourself why you don't feel equally as queasy about having a baby chicken slaughtered for your benefit. Just, something to think about. In our conversation, Josh and I didn't even get to things like how increased extreme weather events or farm fires facilitated by drought or the reduced availability or increased prices of water and raw materials and food and electricity is going to impact the poultry industry in the future. And I think actually that's going to create some market conditions that make cultivated meat potentially more economically attractive because we all know it tastes the same, right? So it's just these economic things that we need to work out. If you're curious about these products and you live in Singapore, lucky you, go get some of that meat and let us know what you think. Send us a social media post. As for the rest of us, we'll keep our sensors pointed at Eat Just and look for them to come to a restaurant or store near us. This week, in honor of World Oceans Day, which takes place on June 8th, our faith in humanity is restored by marine ecologist, conservation biologist, and associate professor at Florida International University, Jeremy Kitska. He has spent the majority of his career researching large marine vertebrates, and we all know that the blue whale is the biggest one, and he has spent a lot of time researching them in the Indian Ocean. Blue whales are also some of the rarest animals on Earth, and scientists say that there might only be as many as 15,000 blue whales left on the planet. Obviously, that is significantly lower a population than their natural population was before commercial whaling activity started in the 19th century. And the last research on this population in the Indian Ocean was back in the 1960s when there was a lot of illegal whaling going on. So Jeremy teamed up with his colleague at the University of the Seychelles and Oceanic Films UK, Kate Stafford, to investigate. They completed 2 expeditions in 2020 and 2021, and they found 5 sightings, up to 10 blue whales. Now, while this number might seem low, it's actually pretty groundbreaking because there was no information prior to this beyond the fact that the last blue whale in the region was killed in 1964. To encourage conservation, Jeremy and his team have engaged with local tourism operators and the government to identify how to limit the impact of whale watching on blue whales and other marine life. And they've also supported the involvement of local students at the University of the Seychelles, saying that these initiatives are critical for the long term stability and sustainability of research and conservation. And while we as Earthlings collectively still don't know very much about blue whales, the data collected in the Seychelles by Jeremy and Kate gives us a path forward, and we thank them for their efforts to protect the largest creatures living on this beautiful blue-green space flower that we call home.